it just really came down to how can we get people to say yes to Netlify quicker? B-Dougie here with another video, and this one's actually a video that I didn't even think to ever do. This video is about the Jamstack, and I've been involved with the Jamstack since about the beginning. I was seeing a lot of Dev2 posts and a lot of blog posts just in general, and also some YouTube videos of like, what is the Jamstack? And then folks kind of go to jamstack.org and they scroll through and then they say like, oh, the Jamstack is, JavaScript APIs and markup. And I know that even companies like Netlify, they're moving away from just JavaScript APIs and markup, because I think it's kind of grown to something bigger. But first, I want to tell you what the Jamstack is, and I also want to tell you my involvement with the Jamstack and its community.
What is the Jamstack? But how many people actually understand what the Jamstack is?
So there is a new term that I've been hearing more and more called Jamstack. What exactly that is? Now,
the best place to find out about the Jamstack and like the sort of origin and its details is to go to jamstack.org. This is a site that it had existed around the time when I first joined Netlify. If you've watched any of these videos here, or you know me personally or on Twitter, you know that I used to work at this company called Netlify. Almost company.netlify, called Netlify. And we actually put together this site, actually an older version of this site, to sort of explain Jamstack best practices and like what is the Jamstack. And really the Jamstack, it's an idea around how to architect your applications. I used to do this talk of a couple years ago, back in 2017, in 2016 about the Jamstack and how you can have this one thing, which is like the combination of jelly and peanut butter together. So if you're in the jam, think of the Smuckers, where they had actually, what was it called? They had the jar. I used to talk about this all the time, and it's gonna.
A few moments later.
Oh, Goobers. Goobers is what it is. But yeah, you'd have the jar of Goobers, and Goobers is basically jam and peanut butter all in the same jar. The problem with the jam and the peanut butter is that when you get to the bottom, all you have is peanut butter left, because all the jam doesn't really, it kind of sits between the peanut butter. Peanut butter's heavier, so when you first put it in the jar. Anyway, but what I'm getting at is that what's better is having the jam and the peanut butter separated, so that way you can separate your concerns. That's explaining the Jamstack, and like folks who like really go through and just read exactly what's on jamstack.org, like I live this, so that's like my experience. And you could just Google my name in Jamstack and probably find me talk in way more detail about the Jamstack and why you should use it. What I do want to talk about is why the Jamstack, and really the truth about the Jamstack and why it exists and why it sort of took off is because at the time of the Jamstack really starting to be used by Netlify made a go-to-market decision of static site generators and leveraging those to get your site up and running on Netlify as quickly as possible. So if you think of like Jekyll and Middleman, and now you think of Gatsby, and even now Next would fall in that category because it has a static built output. They specifically wanted to be able to say, if someone came through support and said, hey, can I host my app on Netlify? The hardest part that we had to go through, because I helped out with support in the beginning too as well. It was just, I'd mentioned in a previous video, I was employee 3. So like there weren't a lot of people who were doing support. We had a full-time support person, but everybody put their hands in the pot and answered questions. And I think it's the best way as an engineer is to answer support tickets, because you learn about the stuff that you're shipping and how sometimes it's not working.
A man and a woman.
Through the conversations to support, we found that we had to do so much explaining of like, does your app do this? Do you use Git? Is it hosted on GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket? Is it using a build command? Like all those questions you had to ask to be able to find out, can you use Netlify? Was like too many questions to ask to begin with for anybody. So we started asking folks, is your site Jamstack? Is it Jamstack ready? And it became so much easier to sort of pitch and sell and convince other developers to use Netlify, because if you're already using Jamstack, even if you didn't know what it was, then you were able to sort of ship that project into production. And I will say that Jamstack is never meant to be a Netlify owned property. So I won't point that out, even though we put a lot of thought into like the term. Actually, if you go to Jamstack Radio, which is a podcast that I run, episode number 2, we talk about where Jamstack came from. So it wasn't actually invented by Netlify. It was invented by the Netlify CEO's friend. We ended up trying to figure out what term to apply to Jamstack sites, and Jamstack just made the most sense. That was what we're going to apply into our documentation, our material, the podcast. And this actually really came out because right before, right as I joined Netlify as an engineer, we were part of the accelerator, which is called HeavyBit. HeavyBit being an accelerator in San Francisco for developer tool startups. Definitely check it out if you have a tool or a startup. But what I'm getting at is they asked us, would we like to, as part of the accelerator, they're starting a podcast studio. And they said, would you like to do a podcast as Netlify employees doing a podcast? And at the time, we were actually having a conversation about Jamstack and whether or not Jamstack should be the term we use, or should we use I think serverless. This is before serverless actually sort of took off as a term. So it was like at the time, right before serverless sort of took off. And so was it like serverless pre-rendering or what, like static build output? And we were just trying to get away from the word static. And when you think of statically generated sites or static web apps is what the term that we're using prior. If your app a static web app, and folks would say this, no, it's not static, it's using Node. That would be a sort of like folks would just run away from Netlify at that point if we said static web apps. Because what a lot of people weren't doing at the time is they weren't running npm run build. They're running npm start to start their apps. Like Heroku has a build plugin to be able to run npm start to run a server, and then you pay per minute or per dyno or whatever. And it was the same thing with AWS. It was the same thing with every other provider who was hosting websites. If we can get your server up and running for you, you'll pay by the minute or the second or whatever, and through bandwidth. And that's how people were making money. And Netlify was going the opposite direction, saying, we're not going to give you a running server. We're going to give you a place to host your static web apps or your static web assets. And if you just use a build command, so grunt, gulp, Webpack, which is up and coming. We now have rollup. We have parcel. We have all these other build, Snowpack. We have all these other these build tools to now give you statically outputted assets from a node generated website. And this is why the JavaScript APIs and markups is now no longer the acronym. It's now more than just JavaScript. With that being said, it just really came down to how can we get people to say yes to Netlify quicker? And we adopted the Jamstack for that too as well. So I love seeing that all these other tools like Fauna, we're now seeing Gatsby using Jamstack. We're seeing Vercel using Jamstack. It's such an easier way to sort of talk about the concept of how we build websites and architecture. And it's not about just static. And a lot of people sort of like fall over when it comes to Jamstack, where you have to have no servers. That's not the case. I think the real thing is you should have a separation of your concerns. So if you are running a server to compile your backend and get it a database connected in to an API, that's okay. But it's really about, is your API, is it deeply coupled? Jam and the peanut butter is that when you get to the bottom, all you have is peanut butter left to your front end, to the point where you can't actually separate the concerns. If the answer is yes, it's super coupled together, that I can't actually change the back end to TypeScript, I can't change it to Ruby, I can't change it to Python, then that's where your concerns are not Jamstack ready. So when you have the separation of like, I do have an app, maybe you have a repo, maybe you have a monorepo. A lot of people get hung up on whether your repo is a monorepo or separate folders. I think that's not really the case. It's all about how nimble can your hosting provider choice be. That's the truth about the Jamstack. That's my perception. This is me sort of living through this experience. So next time you see like a what is Jamstack video or blog post, hopefully that context is helpful, because I think all the current context today, it is also valuable. It's valid. This is people actually going through the concept, going through the projects, and actually learning it right then and there for the first time. But I would say like with the Jamstack, I think hands down, I think you could probably build almost any app with the Jamstack today, because when you start taking away the limitations of not having servers and not having jam and the peanut butter, is that when you get to the bottom, all you have is peanut butter left. Stuff in a monorepo, you can actually still deploy your front end and back end separately. You can write different languages for the front end as opposed to the back end as well. Now, when we get into the concept of server-side rendering, that is something that is now also getting muddied up thanks with the React Server components. So look out for more content on that. I hope you found this insightful. maybe you didn't care about the Jamstack before, maybe you've never heard of it. Let me know in the comments below if you have any interest. And if you're interested in watching me build a Jamstack app, I will be building a new app pretty soon for open source. Open source is my side project, opensauce.pizza. We're going to be building a recommendation engine on how to contribute to open source. So like if you're looking for projects to contribute to, I'm building that live on Twitch every Tuesday and Friday. Definitely link in the description below if you're interested in following that story and that project. I appreciate everybody who's watching. Thanks for the likes and subscribes and all that other stuff that you're supposed to say in these videos. And stay saucy.